Welcome back to the English Academy. Today, we are going to talk about a story that is difficult to hear. Because it is not just the story of a Hollywood actress. It is the story of a young girl who became famous before she was old enough to understand fame. A girl who had the kind of career most people could only dream about. A girl who became a television star. A movie actress. A mother. And eventually, a woman who openly talked about some of the darkest moments of her life. Her name was Hayden Panettiere. You may remember her as Claire Bennett from Heroes. You may remember her as Juliet Barnes from Nashville. Maybe you remember her from Remember the Titans or the Scream franchise. But today, millions of people are asking one heartbreaking question. What happened to Hayden Panettiere? And the answer is much bigger than one headline. It is a story about fame. It is a story about pressure. It is a story about addiction, motherhood, loss, recovery. And the difficult journey of trying to find yourself again. So stay with me until the end. Because this story is not only about what happened to Hayden. It is also about something every one of us can understand. Sometimes, the person who looks strongest on the outside is fighting the hardest battle on the inside. Hayden's journey began long before she became a Hollywood star. She entered the entertainment business as a very young child. She appeared in commercials and television projects while she was still growing up. By the time many children were simply thinking about school, friends, and games, Hayden was already learning lines, standing in front of cameras, going to auditions, and working with professional crews. She was talented. She was confident. And people noticed her. She appeared in projects such as Remember the Titans and became known for her work in both television and film. From the outside, everything looked perfect. A beautiful young actress. A growing career. A bright future. But there was something people often forget about child stars. They are still children. They may work like adults. But emotionally, they are still learning how to become themselves. Hayden grew up in an industry where appearance mattered. Success mattered. Public opinion mattered. And eventually, millions of people began forming an opinion about who Hayden Panettiere was supposed to be. Then came the role that changed her life. Heroes. In 2006, Hayden became Claire Bennett. Claire was a teenager with a supernatural ability to heal. The character was brave. She was vulnerable. She was powerful. And audiences loved her. Suddenly, Hayden was no longer just a young actress. She was a major television star. Her face was everywhere. Fans recognized her. The media wanted interviews. Magazines wanted photographs. Hollywood wanted more. And Hayden was still incredibly young. Think about how strange that must have been. You are still trying to understand who you are. While millions of strangers already believe they know you. You are growing up. But your growth is happening in public. Every change can be noticed. Every mistake can become a headline. Every relationship can become gossip. Every photograph can be judged. And every success creates another expectation. But Hayden continued. She worked. She appeared on television. She made movies. And then another major role came into her life. Nashville. This time, she played Juliet Barnes. Juliet was a young country music star. She was successful. She was beautiful. She was ambitious. But behind that glamorous image was a deeply troubled woman. Juliet struggled with relationships. She struggled with fame. She struggled with addiction. She struggled with motherhood. She struggled with her own emotions. And slowly, something unusual began happening. The fictional life Hayden was playing started becoming strangely close to her real life. At first, it was simply acting. That is what actors do. They read a script. They become a character. They perform. Then they go home. But what happens when the character's pain begins to look like your own? What happens when you are acting out emotions that you are already experiencing? What happens when you spend your working day pretending to be broken, while secretly trying to put yourself back together? For Hayden, that line between Juliet and herself became increasingly difficult to separate. And then came another life-changing chapter. Motherhood. In 2014, Hayden became a mother to her daughter, Kaya. From the outside, it should have been one of the happiest moments of her life. But internally, Hayden was struggling. She experienced postpartum depression. And this was not simply normal exhaustion after having a baby. It became a serious emotional battle. Hayden later spoke openly about how difficult that period had been. She loved her daughter. But she was struggling to feel like herself. And when a person is already carrying emotional pain, they sometimes look for something that can temporarily make that pain quieter. For Hayden, alcohol and addiction eventually became part of the story. Her problems became serious enough that she sought treatment. But recovery did not happen overnight. There was no magical morning when everything suddenly became perfect. There were difficult days. There were setbacks. There were moments when she felt hopeful. And moments when she felt completely lost. And the hardest part was that Hayden was not struggling in private. She was famous. The world was watching. And that meant every difficult moment could become a public discussion. When a normal person needs time to recover, they can disappear. But when you are famous, disappearing creates headlines. Silence creates rumors. A bad photograph creates questions. And personal pain can become entertainment for strangers. Hayden was discovering something that many people learn only after years of life. Fame can give you opportunities. But fame cannot protect you from being human. And soon, her personal struggles would begin affecting her career, her relationships, and the life she wanted to build as a mother. The girl who once seemed to have everything was now fighting to hold on to the most important thing of all. Herself. And that is where the real story begins. The hardest part of Hayden Panettiere's story was not that she struggled. It was how many different struggles began happening at the same time. Her career was changing. Her personal life was changing. She was becoming a mother. She was dealing with postpartum depression. And she was also fighting addiction. From the outside, people could still see the actress. But inside, Hayden was fighting to become healthy again. She entered treatment and tried to take control of her life. But recovery is rarely a straight road. Sometimes you move forward. Then something happens. You fall back. You get up again. And you start over. That does not mean recovery has failed. It means recovery is human. Hayden also faced one of the most painful decisions of her life involving her daughter, Kaya. After her relationship with Vladimir Klitschko ended, Kaya primarily lived with her father. In 2018, Hayden agreed to give him full custody. To people looking from the outside, this could easily be misunderstood. But Hayden's own explanation was much more complicated. She believed her daughter needed stability. And she recognized that at that point in her life, she was not in the best position to provide it. That decision hurt her deeply. Because imagine loving your child and still having to admit that you need to become stronger before you can give them everything they deserve. That is not an easy decision. And it is not something that can be understood from a headline. Hayden continued to love her daughter. She continued to speak about Kaya with affection. But emotionally, the separation was painful. She had become a mother. Yet she was not living the everyday life she had imagined. And when someone is already struggling with depression and addiction, that kind of pain can become overwhelming. But Hayden did something important. She kept trying. She did not simply disappear forever. She did not decide that her career was over. She began taking steps toward rebuilding her life. After Nashville ended in 2018, Hayden stepped away from Hollywood for a significant period. For fans, it looked like she had disappeared. But sometimes disappearing is not giving up. Sometimes it is surviving. Sometimes you need to step away from the noise. From the cameras. From the expectations. And from people constantly asking what is wrong with you. Sometimes you need to stop performing for everyone else. And start listening to yourself. That is what Hayden was trying to do. Years passed. And slowly, she began returning. Then came Scream 6. For many fans, seeing Hayden back on screen was emotional. Because this was not simply another movie role. It represented something. She was still here. She was still working. She was still capable of rebuilding her career. But she was no longer the same young woman who had become famous on Heroes. She had lived through things. She had become a mother. She had experienced addiction. She had experienced depression. She had experienced loss. She had stepped away from Hollywood. And now she was coming back with a different understanding of herself. But just as she was trying to rebuild, another devastating loss entered her life. In 2023, Hayden's younger brother, Hayden Panettiere, died. He was also an actor. Losing a sibling can change a person forever. And for Hayden, this loss came after years of emotional struggles. Yet again, she had to keep moving. That is something people often don't understand about grief. Life does not stop because you are hurting. The world keeps moving. People go to work. Cars keep driving. Phones keep ringing. The sun comes up. And somehow, you have to get out of bed. You have to continue. Even when a part of you wants everything to stop. Hayden continued. And eventually, she decided that she wanted to tell her story. Not through a television character. Not through a magazine headline. Not through someone else's version of events. Her own story. In 2026, she released her memoir, This Is Me, A Reckoning. And the title itself says a lot. This is me. Not the celebrity version. Not the perfect version. Not the version people created from photographs. Me. The real person. The memoir explored the difficult parts of her life, including child stardom, postpartum depression, addiction, recovery, trauma, relationships, motherhood, and loss. For the first time, Hayden could explain her life in her own words. She could talk about what fame had cost her. She could talk about the moments when she felt lost. She could talk about the people she loved. And she could talk about the person she was trying to become. There is something powerful about taking control of your own story. Because when people know only your mistakes, they may define you by those mistakes. When people know only your worst moment, they may think that moment is who you are. But Hayden was saying something different. My life is bigger than my worst moment. My past is part of me. But it does not have to control my future. That message became one of the most important parts of her later life. She wanted her experiences to help other people. She wanted people struggling with addiction, depression, trauma, and loss to understand that they were not alone. And just when it seemed like Hayden was entering another chapter, a heartbreaking announcement arrived. Hayden Panettiere had died at only 36. The news shocked fans because she had recently been publicly telling her story. She had been promoting her memoir. She had been speaking about her life. She had been looking toward the future. And suddenly, there was no future chapter left to write. But before we talk about the final chapter, there is something we need to understand. Hayden's death should not make us rewrite her entire life as a tragedy. Because she was much more than her struggles. And the story of her comeback may be more important than the story of her downfall. When people hear the words, Hayden Panettiere, they may immediately think about heroes. Claire Bennett. The young woman who could heal herself. And there is something almost symbolic about that character when you look at Hayden's real life. Because Hayden spent years trying to heal herself too. Not from a fictional injury. But from real emotional pain. From addiction. From depression. From trauma. From loss. From the pressure of growing up in public. And from mistakes she could not simply erase. That is why her story cannot be reduced to a downfall. A downfall would mean she fell. And stayed there. But Hayden kept getting back up. She stepped away from Hollywood. She entered treatment. She tried to recover. She returned to acting. She spoke openly about her experiences. She wrote her memoir. She tried to rebuild her relationship with herself. And that is something worth remembering. Because recovery does not always look impressive. Nobody gives you an award for getting through a difficult night. Nobody puts your photograph on a magazine cover because you finally asked for help. Nobody applauds when you choose not to make the same mistake again. But those moments can change your entire life. Hayden knew that. She understood that rebuilding yourself can take years. And sometimes, you rebuild one small piece at a time. A healthier decision. A difficult conversation. A day without giving up. A decision to seek help. A decision to forgive yourself. A decision to try again. Those things may look small. But together, they can change a life. And Hayden's life had another important lesson. The person you see on the screen is never the entire human being. When we watch an actor, we see the character. We see the smile. We see the performance. We see the red carpet. But we do not see the private moments. We do not see the fear. We do not see the loneliness. We do not see the nights when someone cannot sleep. We do not see the phone calls they are afraid to make. We do not see the tears that happen after the cameras stop. Hayden lived through that difference. The world saw a successful actress. But she was also a person trying to survive her own life. That is why we should be careful when judging people. Someone may be struggling and still be talented. Someone may make mistakes and still deserve compassion. Someone may disappear and still be fighting to come back. And someone may look completely fine, while carrying something extremely heavy. Hayden's relationship with her daughter is another example of how complicated real life can be. She loved Kaya. But loving someone does not automatically make every decision easy. Hayden had to accept that her daughter needed stability at a time when Hayden herself was struggling. That decision was painful. But it also showed that sometimes love means putting another person's needs before your own feelings. Hayden continued to care about her daughter. And she hoped that one day Kaya would understand her story. That is one reason her memoir was so important. She was not only telling her story to strangers. She was leaving behind a piece of herself for her daughter. A record of what happened. A record of what she survived. A record of what she learned. And perhaps a message saying, I was not perfect. But I loved you. I tried. And I never stopped trying to become better. That is the part of Hayden's story that deserves to be remembered. Not just the addiction. Not just the depression. Not just the headlines. Not just the difficult relationships. The effort. The courage. The comeback. The honesty. Now, after her death, there is understandably a huge amount of curiosity about what exactly happened. People want answers. They want a reason. They want to know the final details. But we have to be responsible. Hayden's family confirmed her death. However, the cause of death has not been publicly disclosed. That means we should not take old struggles from her past and automatically use them to explain her death. That would be speculation. And Hayden deserves facts. Not rumors. Not internet theories. Not sensational stories created simply because people want an answer. The truth is, we may have to accept that we do not know everything. And sometimes not knowing is better than inventing an explanation. What we do know is that Hayden had spent years talking about recovery. We know she had recently released her memoir. We know she was still working. And we know she wanted her experiences to mean something. She wanted people to learn from them. She wanted people who were struggling to feel less alone. And that brings us to something bigger than Hayden herself. Because her story is not only about Hollywood. It is about us. All of us have chapters we do not want other people to read. Mistakes. Failures. Regrets. Bad decisions. Painful relationships. Things we wish we could change. But your worst chapter does not have to become your entire identity. Read that again in your mind. Your worst chapter does not have to become your entire identity. Maybe you failed. Maybe you lost someone. Maybe you lost yourself. Maybe you wasted years. Maybe people judged you. Maybe you disappointed someone you love. But the story is not over simply because one chapter was painful. Hayden's life showed that. She disappeared from Hollywood. And came back. She struggled. And sought help. She made mistakes. And tried to change. She lost people. And continued living. She was judged. And eventually told her own story. That is why her legacy should not be built only around tragedy. It should also be built around resilience. Because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is simply decide to try one more time. And that brings us to the final part of Hayden Panettiere's story. After everything. After the fame. After heroes. After Nashville. After motherhood. After addiction. After depression. After loss. After years away from Hollywood. Hayden was finally telling the world. This is who I am. Not the perfect version. Not the celebrity version. The real version. And maybe that is how we should remember her. Not as someone who had a perfect life. Because she didn't. Not as someone who never made mistakes. Because she did. Not as someone who never struggled. Because she struggled deeply. But as someone who kept trying. That matters. Because life does not always give us the ending we expect. Sometimes we work hard and still lose something. Sometimes we make progress and then face another setback. Sometimes we think we finally understand our life. And then something changes everything. But that does not mean the journey was meaningless. Hayden's journey touched millions of people. Her performances became part of people's childhoods. Claire Bennett became one of the most recognizable characters from Heroes. Juliet Barnes became one of Nashville's most memorable characters. And beyond the characters, Hayden became someone who was willing to talk about things many people are afraid to discuss. Addiction. Depression. Motherhood. Trauma. Recovery. Loss. She showed that being famous does not make someone immune to pain. And perhaps that is one of the biggest lessons from her life. We often look at successful people and assume they have everything figured out. We think money means happiness. Fame means confidence. Success means peace. But none of those things guarantee peace. A person can have millions of people who know their name. And still feel alone. A person can stand in front of thousands of people. And still be fighting a private battle. A person can smile for photographs. And cry when the cameras disappear. So be kind. You never really know what someone is carrying. And if you are the person carrying something heavy right now, remember this. You are not your worst mistake. You are not your worst day. You are not the opinion someone has about you. You are not the relationship that ended. You are not the job you lost. You are not the year you wasted. You are not the chapter that broke you. You are the person who is still here. And as long as you are still here, there is still another chapter. Hayden's story also teaches us something about asking for help. Sometimes we think asking for help means we are weak. It doesn't. Sometimes asking for help is the strongest decision you can make. Hayden entered treatment. She stepped away when she needed to. She spoke about her struggles. She tried to rebuild. And she showed that recovery is not about becoming the person you were before everything went wrong. Sometimes recovery means becoming someone new. Someone more honest. Someone more aware. Someone who understands their own limits. Someone who knows when to say, I need help. I need time. I need another chance. And there is nothing weak about that. There is another lesson in Hayden's story. Do not wait until your life looks perfect before you start living it. Hayden spent years trying to rebuild. And in the final period of her life, she was still thinking about the future. She was writing. She was working. She was sharing her experiences. She was talking about her daughter. She was trying to use everything she had survived to help other people. That tells us something important. You do not have to have a perfect past to create a meaningful future. Your past can be painful. And your future can still matter. Your past can be messy. And your future can still be beautiful. Your past can contain mistakes. And you can still become someone you are proud of. That is what resilience means. Not never falling. Getting back up. Again. And again. And again. Hayden's death at 36 is heartbreaking. There are questions that may remain unanswered. Her family has confirmed her death, but the cause has not been publicly disclosed. And we should respect that uncertainty. We should not allow rumors to become her final story. Because her final story should not be only about how she died. It should also be about how she lived. She lived as a child performer. She lived as a Hollywood star. She lived as an actress. She lived as a mother. She lived through addiction. She lived through depression. She lived through grief. She lived through recovery. She lived through judgment. And she kept trying to find her way forward. That is a complicated life. But it is also a human life. And maybe the best way to remember Hayden Panettiere is not by pretending she was perfect. Maybe it is by remembering that she was real. She had strengths. She had weaknesses. She had dreams. She had fears. She made mistakes. She learned. She suffered. She loved. She tried. And she left behind a story that may help someone else feel less alone. So if you are watching this right now and you are going through a difficult period, please remember one thing. Your story is not finished. You may be in a chapter you hate. You may not understand why something happened. You may feel like everyone else is moving forward while you are standing still. But life is not a race. Sometimes you need to stop. Sometimes you need to heal. Sometimes you need to start again. And starting again does not mean you failed. It means you decided your story was worth continuing. Hayden Panettiere's story reminds us of that. A child star became a global name. A global name became a woman struggling behind the scenes. That woman stepped away. She fought. She recovered. She returned. She told her story. And even though her life ended far earlier than anyone expected, her story does not have to end with tragedy. It can end with a lesson. Be kind to people. Ask for help when you need it. Do not judge someone by their worst moment. Do not let your past decide your future. And most importantly, never believe that one painful chapter is the whole book. Because it isn't. There can always be another page. Another morning. Another decision. Another chance. Another beginning. This is the English Academy. And if Hayden's story taught us anything, it is that behind every famous face is a human being. And behind every difficult chapter, there is still a story worth understanding. Rest in peace, Hayden Panettiere. And may the people who loved you remember not only the struggles you faced, but also the light you brought into their lives.